Hi, and welcome to another episode of About the Authors TV. I'm your host, Jake Brown. Imagine you were a mother whose daughter came to you one day and asked you to write a guide on what to do when I'm gone, and you'd have exactly what the mother daughter team of journalist Suzy Hopkins and illustrator Hallie Bateman created together in the graphic memoir that garnered instantly round praise, from book page crowning it an exceptional self help guide filled with plenty of heartfelt wisdom and edgy humor. The Los Angeles Magazine agreed was a funny, beautiful guidebook about facing what Kirkus called the inevitable with grace and humor, even earning a fan and Breakfast Club alum, Ali Sheedy, who vowed to keep this book close to the day I need it and pass it on to my son for the day he will. While CNN applauded the collaboration between Hopkins with her daughter Hallie, an illustrator and fellow writer whose work's been featured in the New Yorker and the New York Times. Cincinnati Magazine would similarly spotlight the mother-daughter team's collaboration on the popular and critically acclaimed graphic novel about maternal love and anticipatory grief, before turning the spotlight to their latest 6 years later, teaming up once again, this time to write a graphic account of what happened to Suzy Hopkins in the years after the fateful day of her husband leaving her, tracing her long path through disbelief, shock, and depression, and very slowly into understanding and healing. Their new book, What to Do When You Get Dumped, a guide to unbreaking your heart, while being such a heavy and honest book, is also funny. It's written as a guide for others experiencing traumatic breakups, with lots of specifics from Hopkins' own experience, right down to the countdown of days toward healing that appear in the corners of each page. And mother and daughter join us today to talk about it all. Suzy, Hallie, welcome to the show. Now, Suzy, growing up, what sorts of books could we have found you pulling off the shelves, either at home or at the library?
My mom was a librarian and had 6 kids, and she, basically we had a pretty chaotic childhood. She had my father, was military, and, my mom basically had to work with the 6 kids and scrambled a lot. So, I grew up in a library, and, Charlotte's Web has gotta be my all-time favorite. I can rattle off the children's books. So that was my background, and I went into journalism, because partly because of Watergate, and partly because I just had this image of myself as a hotshot investigative reporter.
Hallie, from your own memories, what kind of storytelling environment did your mom create for you growing up?
My mom and my dad were both journalists, so we grew up with lots of conversation about writing, reading, a lot of griping about grammar at the table and things like that. And our house had enormous walls of bookshelves, just like so many walls were just a bookshelf packed with books. So yeah, grew up surrounded by reading and books, and I think we were always surrounded by an abundance of books, and I personally gravitated so much towards comics. I remember we would go to the local bookstore and the comics were in the back left corner, and I would just, like, beeline there every single time and be devouring, like, Foxtrot, Garfield, The Far Side, like, um that was really what I loved, and, yeah, I did not put it together until much later in my life when I actually in college decided to become an illustrator, like, "Oh yeah, I've always I've always been into this."
Suzy, we imagine you just enjoyed seeing your children take to storytelling in whatever medium they found themselves most inspired.
I wanted immersion because, language was always a huge comfort to me. In childhood chaos, I could sit with books and it represented like an emotional safety zone, and my mother, was a real gentle spirit so it was a very there was a lot of comfort around reading, and there was a lot of brain development, and I wanted both those things for my kids, and I have, 2 boys as well, and Hallie's in the middle, and my, oldest was a voracious reader, and Hallie then came along, was also a voracious reader, but she very early on gravitated to the art side of things. So she was busy actually doing art from about 5 on in a to what I thought was a pretty significant way.
So it sounds like you had a feeling Hallie was going to pursue the arts professionally when she was grown.
Yeah, it's something that she loved, and honestly, seeing her as a little kid, her love of it is much the same as today, where if she can't do her art, she's a little testy.
Well, when I was a kid, my mom would say, "You're an artist," like, uh, through high school and stuff, would talk about that, and I was so I don't know why, but I was just like, "Oh, whatever, shut up. No, I'm not." Like, I think she saw it and was I didn't connect it at all. I don't think I was known among my friends as, like, being particularly good. I definitely did it, but it wasn't like, my other friend was the one that was good at drawing in our friend group. Like, it wasn't that kind of thing, so I didn't really believe her, and I didn't really see what she saw, but I certainly, felt very supported by both my parents, which I feel really lucky about when I did come to my senses and realize, like, "Oh, art is my purpose in life." My parents were like, "Great, follow that," and that is not the story for most creative kids.
Beyond mom and dad and the local libraries, we ordinarily find other unsung heroes of every creative's journey. Hallie, for you, among art teachers and others academically, who do you count in that club?
I had a teacher in 6th grade, an art teacher who was such a gentle person, and she had this total belief. She said everyone is an artist, and um, like I said, it wasn't my identity at that point, but I believe that now, and I say that, and I love that. That attitude of inclusiveness and that it's something that's within all of us. And then I had an English teacher in high school, Mrs. Nixon, who I remember pulled me aside and was giving me feedback on an essay and just said, "Everything you write has depth to it." And to have someone say that in high school and feel, um, I don't know, feel seen and affirmed in that way was, I think really positive for just conquering my doubts and, um, I don't know, I still am kind of shocked by that. I think that's really amazing that she said that to me.
Now, Susie, as you were out in the world working as a journalist, who do you count among professors or editors who similarly encouraged you along the way to finding your own voice on the page?
I had a funny career. I was a newspaper reporter and editor for 4 papers and all fair, community papers. I worked in Sacramento for a while, but mostly small. And I the best editors to me are the ones that say, fix it. I'm gonna mark it up and you fix it. And that was my early training. I went to journalism school and then, had the luck to have editors that did that. And that it's hard to go through and you get better as years of practice. And then I did when my kids were born, I started I left journalism for a bit and I did memoirs for elderly people. And that was really kind of a turning point. And then after I did some memoirs, I started a magazine, also a community magazine that featured a lot of in-depth features about, World War II veterans and people in the community with it. And it made an imprint in the community. And for me, the best work I did was a volunteer project that interviewed World War II veterans, most of whom had never been interviewed before, and a lot of them had had trauma and the cathartic nature of telling your story, which you've held in, and grief that you've held in, because they all had basically unspoken grief around their service. And so that's kind of the mix of things I've done.
Hallie, we'd love to hear a bit about your professional successes as well, working as a graphic artist before teaming up with your mom.
I've been published in the New Yorker, in their shout section. I've generally done longer humor pieces, written pieces, comic pieces, but there's the resident cartoonists are the people that I think of as being the print cartoonists. So it is amazing to now have been in the New Yorker. I remember when I first started to think about "Oh, I think I might be an artist. I think I might wanna do this." I was in college, I was studying creative writing, and I took an art class truly just to fulfill a requirement. It was an intro to art class, and in the class, they had us use a dip pen. It's, that kinda old-fashioned pen where you dip in the ink and you draw, and it's kind of this this very, like, sharp, different type of line, and I remember drawing with that and feeling completely awakened and completely surprised by how it looked and how it felt to draw with that, and my teacher walked around and she was like, "That looks like it could be in the New Yorker." And I didn't, like I said, I didn't grow up being like, "I'm the one that's good at art," or anything like that, but, it really sparked something in me, and before I was in the New Yorker, I was told for years that my work looked like the New Yorker. So to not have to to not have to have people say, "Oh, that looks like it could be in the New Yorker," and to say, "Yeah," like, it's nice to have worked with them. I really appreciate the editing, at the New Yorker and the sensibility that they have brought to comics, and, I think they've really gotten quite a bit more, like, inclusive in the last few years, and yeah, so, I guess I'm trying to think about, like, professional path, started out as an illustrator and art director, and then, moved to New York and quit my art directing job and really decided to focus on my own work and comics and eventually doing books, and I feel so lucky to have met people, collaborators, that saw a place for my work even more so, I think, than The New Yorker. I found a home at this amazing blog called The All um, that was alive at the time and sadly is one of those media companies that isn't anymore. But they gave me a weekly column where I got to explore absolutely anything I wanted. I did comics about drawing on the subway and um, every dog I saw today. Like there was just, I could just really explore uh, what I was interested in, and I think that being given that opportunity led me to the New Yorker, led me to books, led me to having some trust in my own sensibilities. As you know, I had been doing kind of like editorial illustration, and what I love to do and where I flourish is words and images in combination, and getting to do books like this with my mom where I get to be involved in all parts of it, and it's such a joy.
So, Hallie, there came a point where life and art intersected for you, and what proved to be a profound idea that Los Angeles Magazine discovered to be simultaneously deeply personal and super universal, in that it chisels to the core how complicated and wonderful mother daughter relationships are, and rooted in the idea basically of what Booklist describes as a thoughtful treatment of how to handle one's own life and death in addition to the loss of a loved one. Noting importantly that readers may expect that this mother daughter exercise is heartfelt, but will probably be surprised by how thorough it is. Did this come out of a bad dream or a movie you watched where a child suddenly loses a parent in a car accident or medical emergency before you two first talked about teaming up on what became What to Do When I'm Gone?
I was in my early 20s, and I think I was in a period maybe of living at home, and I had a sleepless night, where I just lay awake and was I think this is something that I would do from time to time, and I think that people do, or maybe people with anxiety, um, think, imagining the things you're afraid of, imagining my loved ones dying. Um, I think in my tracks in my mind, that had always been imagining a moment of getting a piece of news, imagining a phone call, a realization like that. And this particular night, I played the tape onward. What would happen after that moment of gut punch and grief, and the seemingly obvious but not realization sunk in that my life would continue to go on and that I would not have my mom through the experience of losing her, that I wouldn't have this person that I turn to for guidance to guide me. And I came up with the idea that night, just laying in bed thinking about, okay, well, a book would solve this sort of. So brought it up to my mom the next morning and said, "Hey, this is what I I would like. Can you write this book for me?" And uh, because my parents and my family was always so candid about talking about death and things like that, I wasn't nervous to bring it up. It was just breakfast conversation, and then my mom was like, "Yeah, let's sure, I'll write it."
Respectfully, Susie, that seems like a daunting task for any parent to be asked, regardless of how beautifully it turned out. At first, were you worried at all about saying or writing the wrong thing? And how challenging was it creatively and emotionally to have to envision your own absence from your children's lives and then write about how they would best go on without you?
I had lost my mom and gone through that, and I thought the only thing I had that really mattered to me was I had interviewed her before her death and have a verbatim, book that I made that has some stuff that held a bunch of family secrets that had never come out. It just was amazing because it was, she had the time at that point in her life and she was willing to talk. And so I was all in favor knowing that memoirs and collecting the memories of, people before they go can really help you later in your family, and then grandchildren come along and other generations might that they might really value that. So I was fine with it, but I had my magazine, which was growing, and I just Hallie was, very pesky about it, and I just swatted her like a fly, and a few years went by, so I didn't do it.
Hallie, how did you ultimately bring your mom to the table to begin working on this in earnest? Given you had a vision of this becoming a graphic novel with your own illustrations created in reaction to what she'd be writing.
5 years went by.
We took a trip, to Maine because she was living in New York and I really missed her, so we went to a cabin in Maine and she brought her laptop and said, "You can't get away. I'm gonna ask you these questions." And as she was asking the questions, because 'cause I've been in journalism for a long time, and, I began to see that my answers and her questions really had this universal feel to them. And because it was not going to be a book, that wasn't even on my radar. It would be a little family project like I had done for my mom, or for us after my mom's was gone.
We began by me sitting my mom down on this trip, asking her questions. "All right, you just died. What do I do? Tell me the next step." And, um, you know, taking notes and recording her, and then I think throughout a few days there, we started to get excited because it was fun, and I think it was very, "Mom, I just remember you having answers to everything," like, being like, "Yeah, then you would wanna do this," and, it was all, like, funny and dark. Then it became something that we realized that we wanted to work on together.
And the trick was I with for my 2 boys that I wanted the advice to be exactly what I would say, not to it's not a fake project. It was exactly the advice that I would give to all my kids that then I hope they'd look back on after I was gone and go, "Yeah, she had that, that was how she spoke, that was her, take on things." And that's what you retain of people, their kind of unique qualities, and it came through in the language.
The Library Journal would celebrate this brave work as full of the kind of counsel that'll have readers longing to call their own mother. The book additionally features recipes that exemplify Hopkins' charming, loving voice. Hallie, as you then began complementing the text with illustrations, please talk about how one inspired the other.
The way that I'll work on a graphic book like this is, we get together a text draft, and in the text draft, there's descriptions of the art. So, I think we initially were focused on the text, but then adding in a description of the visuals, and um, this was, my first project working with my mom like this, and I recently discovered, before working on this book together, my mom had never read a graphic novel.
Yeah.
So, um, there was a lot of trying to explain to her the image is gonna say this huge like, a big part of this is gonna be communicated by the image, so the text is minimal. The text is as kind of spare as it needs to be in order to give power and the combination of the word and the image to work together. And there was a lot of resistance from my mom of like, I just wrote these 4 paragraphs. Like, you're telling me you don't need 3 of them? And it's like, yeah, you just need like 4 sentences or 2 sentences or 4 words. And there was a lot of squabbling, a lot of kind of pushing each other, and a lot of conversation about the subject matter, about,
Yeah.
my mom's instructions and me, um, yeah, either pushing back and being like, "Would that really be what you say?" Like, it was, incredibly collaborative.
Susie, I'm wondering from your point of view about being reverse edited, so to speak, by your own child when you've been a professional writer for decades. How do you feel that creative give and take helped improve the project as you two shaped it together?
Yeah, I mean, that project, the second book would be very different if without the, coming to grips with how to collaborate, and to be fair, I honestly didn't I hadn't read a graphic novel. It felt like at the time, like a generational issue, but now I love them, and so we on our second writing retreat where, I'll be in a hotel room and I'll be writing and Hallie will be sketching and coming up with these pages in the sequence. Um, at some point, I was too slow to grasp how little text was needed and how much more sparely I needed to write, which is hard. You go like, man, I love words. I want to throw more words onto the page. And as she stripped those away, at some point she said, really irritated with me, I've been doing this for 7 years. And to my credit, I did not fire back. Well, I've actually been and so we and the fact was I'm a mom first and foremost, and I had to come see Hallie as a full professional with incredible talent. And it's not that I didn't see it, but I just wasn't aware of how far along she was in having developed this talent. So after that book, I go, we're on, we're very different, but we bring strengths and now more patience to these projects because that was a real training ground. And I think a lot of it was she has an image ready to go when she sees a narrative passage and it suggests something to her, and I don't have the access to see that. It's just in her art brain, and then when she tells me, then I'm more able to adapt the text to that. So that's been the learning experience for me.
Did you have any favorite pieces of advice that you passed along to Hallie in the book that still stand up as such now?
When you're looking at your own life and your set of experiences and the family that you come from, and in the course of the book, things happened. Life was unfolding at the same time. So there's one passage where Hallie and I was at work and she called me and she said, "We didn't talk about your advice on when I get married." And she was falling in love with this, wonderful guy and would eventually marry him. And so we sat there and talked about that. And that was a favorite because it was, an on the fly creation that she really if I had died that afternoon, for example, I'm glad that I could say what I wanted to say. I had another one, Hallie, I'll throw in,
Okay.
and that is, I had a dream. So, sometimes when you're writing, it's very, um
Mhm.
I spend a lot of
This
time
one?
writing. Oh, that's the one I was going to say, Hallie,
I
the
found
mom
it.
visit.
Okay, yeah.
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 Go
Yeah.
ahead then.
So I had a dream in which my mom visited me, and that had only ever happened twice. And in this dream, it was so comforting. And then I added a section that talked about, I may come visit you because I got so much comfort from seeing my mom in this dream. And that Hallie did this beautiful illustration, which she was showing. Um, And so that's a very kind of a warm memory, and it only came because when you're writing, sometimes you're writing in the shower, you're writing in bed, you're writing in the car, whatever. That's
Hallie, from blending your visual art with your mother's words, what emerged to become any of what you felt were the most powerful fusion of the two as sections within the book?
So it's called Enjoy This Dream. I'm not prying and I don't want to interrupt. I just thought I'd stop by for a visit. Even if you forget what was said or the specifics of the dream, try to hang on to this feeling of reconnection. Assume I'm not still nagging you to clean your room. Oh, assuming not still nagging you to clean your room, I hope my visit reminds you of how much I will always love you. Yeah, that's one of my favorites too, and the thing that is there throughout the book is this reminder of unconditional love and this levity and humor that I think is so helpful in softening this hard thing. And when I think about working on the book and favorite moments from that process, it's a lot of like me, you know, I came to my mom with this like fear and this fear of something. It's not a what if, it's a when. Um and I just I just love that there's kind of a there's so much love in the book and so much comfort and warmth, and there's a little bit of a, "Meh, get over it. I'm dead." Like, this was kind of a humor there that, like you said, mom, like, there's this way that's you and that's your voice, and the book is not gonna replace my mom, but it's this tome and this capsule and this conversation between us that now exists that um yeah, that is so like honored by being turned into a book, and I feel really grateful that we did that.
Once this book was out in stores and so well received, what marked any of each of your favorite moments experiencing the release?
I think it's been ongoing. For me, mom, it's the letters and the conversations at events and the notes that we receive from people. Um, it's a really unbelievable life that the book has had beyond us.
in journalism anyway, when I was working, you get people that are a lot of times they're just mad at you. And entering book world, which was quite accidental for me, and having a book published that has emotional content, and anytime anybody says this made a difference to me, this made me feel something, that's just a whole different animal. And especially if to be fair, there are people that found some offense in the book, but we've had the vast majority um, understand that you bringing humor to a difficult situation, which is all around grief and talking about grief and moving through grief, can help. And my siblings and I found that it was essential after losing my mom. And, you go on to have these good memories that aren't as clouded by grief later. But I wanted to write from that perspective, and when people get that, that it's meant as a loving tribute to honoring, family members. And, the best use of the book has been when people duplicate it, and they tell us that they have basically done a duplication and asked their parent to, or the parent themselves has written something that is, answering questions that are important within their own family, which may be very different from what we covered, but some of them are the same. So that's that book has just really been heartwarming for me, the response to it.
Your next trek on the page together would prove even braver territory to create in, with CNN reporting on the real life facts that inspired the project, so arriving when Suzy Hopkins' life was suddenly turned upside down. After 30 years of marriage, her husband unexpectedly left her to get back together with a former girlfriend, who also happened to be a marriage counselor. Hopkins grappled with a roller coaster of emotions: heartbreak, rejection, disbelief, sadness, anger, and confusion. Mother and daughter decided to then turn what was a devastating breakup for Hopkins into the new graphic novel, What to Do When You Get Dumped, a guide to unbreaking your heart, which offers an intimate look into the complex emotions of losing someone who once played a pivotal role in your life. Through a chronological countdown over the time it took Hopkins to recover, the pair created a heartfelt guide that blends practical advice with humor, helping those on a healing journey to recognize they're worthy of love. Suzy, we'd be grateful for any personal reflections you'd be willing to share on what led you to feel like you were ready to start on this next therapeutic creative collaboration with Hallie.
Our first book came out in a few months before it actually was released. My husband suddenly told me that he had reconnected with an old girlfriend from 30 years prior, and we had been married 30 years, and he left. So suddenly he was gone. And I was, very thrown by this. We were 2 days away from my kind of formally retiring and going on a long planned trip, and for life just turning upside down, really threw me far more than I ever imagined it would. This was the person I'd spent half my life with, and he, just basically, is a good person, but he is a person that, didn't communicate this with me, and it threw me off a ledge emotionally, and so I did all the things that you do. I got counseling, I went on antidepressants, I talked to people, I hid out from people, I did everything, but still after 3 years, I was having more trouble than I expected. I thought, "Gosh, why am I not done with this?" And it was really looking at myself and going, Why did I not bounce back?" I've bounced back from lots of things before, lots of very difficult things, and, so I began to think about writing about it, and then Hallie gave me the gift of a tarot reading, and the tarot reader, not knowing that I had been heartbroken, said, "You need to write a memoir as a pathway to healing." And it was she just said it was like, "Yeah, you need to go to the store today." It was that clear to her. And so I go, "Okay, I guess I've been handed my papers about what to do," and I thought it might help.
Cincinnati Magazine, in exploring the journey you outline in the book, spotlighted some of what they felt were the most powerful parts of what you documented. From a harrowing roller coaster called Cupid's Revenge that traces your whiplash and various gut wrenching moments after the divorce, including your sister saying of the new girlfriend, whom Hopkins refers to as Y in the memoir, as she looks like you, to a bullet train called Heartbreak Express that zooms across the page. The memoir strikes a very real but also extremely supportive note. From a professional approach, what sort of architecture did you build the narrative around here in terms of what you were chronicling and tapping into your journalistic skill set? Who else did you interview to compare and contrast with your own experience as you were writing this next survival guide?
The book is divided into 4 sections, but the key sections are it starts at the end, so you see the end, and that's when I get dumped, the character gets dumped, and, it has the muddle, and the muddle is this messy, long middle period in which I actually began writing the book in the muddle, and I knew I was in a muddle, and then the third part is the beginning when you kinda get through the worst of the grief and you go, "Well, yeah, I gotta build I've partially started to build a new life, but now I have to take it kinda seriously." It's the beginning of whatever this new thing is, which was just so amorphous to me. Um so I started in the muddle because that's where it was, and I I was writing myself notes of encouragement. Like I would say, "Okay, so what do I know has helped me?" Well, exercise helped, um, music helped, talking to friends who were supportive helped, getting rid of friends who were adding to my personal chaos, that helped, but all of these things have emotional ramifications, so in each of these, I did go through pretty much everything that's listed in the book, and some of it so it's like part memoir, but not terribly personal because my ex-husband is a person on the other side of this thing, and I I think there should be some privacy to that. So I began in the muddle and wrote my way through until one day I just said, "I see that this is a choice, and I feel healed enough that I really am, unbroken," and that is the path of the book, and of course, it's an ongoing process, right? So I kind of began by, uh talking to strangers who'd been really savagely dumped, and, I only talked to about a half dozen, and they were really a mix of people who all of whom agreed that it took so much longer than anyone thinks it does. And, in their case, they were saying, "Oh, it took me 6, 7 years to, like," and it's just depressing news because I thought, I'm fairly competent. I could get over this in, certainly 3 years at the outside. So it was really I began writing it in effort to figure out what was really working and what the dumb things that people said, the journalist perspective of I wanted to record all the events in and around my trying to get through this, although I still wasn't quite sure I would get through it, but then everybody says you do, so I go, I'll push forward in the writing. So that was my path.
Hallie, let's talk about that, as this I'd have to imagine was an especially delicate landscape to create within. And what would you highlight as any poignant results you produced, visually in reaction to what your mother was writing?
I think that for me, the divorce was very personal. It was something that affected our whole family. Um, I'm thankfully still very close with my dad, but it was a really challenging shift for everyone. And when my mom embarked on the book and when we joined forces, I think it was something I really wanted to work on to honor my mom's experience, but also to sort through it with her, to sort through this experience. And the way that we work together is, like I mentioned that we squabble, like it's I roll up my sleeves and work on the text and we talk at length about, is this really true and what are the other angles to this? And um, for me, as someone who loves my dad and is still close to him, part of my role was, I think, in this because it was written in this period when my mom was still in pretty acute pain and it was still, fresh. My being able to kind of call into question if there was a broad brush stroke that kind of if there was any sense of like this, that yeah, this was done like maliciously, and that's a uh, or maybe just in not wanting to look at all the sides of it. I think part of my role um was pulling in the fact that a lot of times the person who breaks your heart is pretty fucked up in their own right. Like, so I think there's certainly like sociopaths out there, and there's a lot of like wild behavior and abuse and all these things. But I think a lot of time it's just like that's really sad for that person. That's really sad for them too. Not that they are the victim in this situation, but that um yeah, that it sucks, and there's multiple ways to look at it. And I remember one of the spreads that I brought into the book and that my mom and I really worked on. I remember working on this and um having this vision of a spread where the two are looking at each other. It's called Blame If You Must. And yeah, I can read from the text. When you fall in love with someone, you sign on to a package deal without being able to see the whole package. X showcases their smile, wit, and sense of fun. It can be hard to see their biases, the consequences of how they were raised, genes for addiction, and so much more. Who can blame you for picking the wrong person when you haven't had access to such essential information? If you cling to the notion that they really were the right person, your one and only true love, you are wrong. Their absence is the proof. And then it shares each of their realities. It says, my reality. You lied and cheated. You didn't talk to me. You were never home. You never wanted to make love. You didn't care about me. His reality. You were always angry. You constantly criticized me. You didn't want to spend time with me. You never wanted to have sex. You didn't care about me. In order for us to, I think, envision my dad's reality, and like that was powerful. That was something that was fleshed out by conversation between the two of us that I think a very hurt person wouldn't want to jump there, right? And then you turn the page and it says, but know that it's not always simple. And it shows each of them as children.
Mm.
My childhood reality. I saw so much violence. I was scared. I never told anyone. I lived with shame. I was lonely. What I needed didn't matter. I needed unconditional love. X's childhood reality. I heard that I was always wrong. I lived with shame. Crying was seen as a weakness. Anger and conflict were hidden. I was lonely. What I needed didn't matter. I needed unconditional love. There's a lot of color going on. This is a spread called Consider Your Options, which, Mom, you were just talking about, one's autonomy in this experience, and that's kind of what this is about.
Yeah, this is about whether to embrace bitterness, which I mean, I've certainly talked to people that have decided to, get stuck in bitterness and in moving forward, you have to sort of grapple with that. Do you try again? Do you work on the issues that you brought in to make a relationship not work, or do you just slip into some kind of denial over it? So it's all this grappling with the difficult issues, I guess, which is what I did because I wanted to examine my role in it and what happened to me. I just go, what it just was, a bomb went off and I wanted to know what happened. So a lot of these sections are uh, um, are mulling that over, and I came to some conclusions on my own, and I think much of what I grappled with is a very universal thing in the wake of the end of a relationship.
Well, sadly, statistically, if you consider how common a story this is, and so few have the skill set or necessarily the push personally to put it out there on the page as honestly, as instructively as you two have here. Hallie, as you near the end of this project, what did you feel were any of the most instructive and constructive results you two were producing together here?
One thing that was cool about this book that I think changed from the first was, I think, Mom, you really came to understand the medium of graphic storytelling more, and I think there was more like this page was, I remember this was you kind of saw this. This is a roller coaster called Cupid's Revenge. It says brace yourself, and it's cataloging the many ups and downs of recovery. It's not just like an upward or a downward journey. And so
But
yeah,
the
my
the
mom.
the t the text boxes are all the downs.
So yeah, I can read them. It's the first one is the first time someone refers to X as your ex and it hasn't occurred to you because it still seems so soon. When you are shown Y's photo and your sister said she kind of looks like you. In the book, your X is the letter X, and the other woman is the letter Y. The first anniversary of the day X dumped you, the first time you see X in public, when X gamely tries to make small talk as you raise your hand in suppressed rage and pain and walk away. the day you are served divorce papers, something you never thought possible, and then multiple arrows. X's birthday, your anniversary, or your secret special occasion anniversary. So it's just all these plummets and spirals and yeah, this was it was cool, mom, to have you envision this and to try to bring it to life. And I think that the more we work together, the more you understand the the power of the image, and the more that
Right, right.
we join forces in understanding. I think we've there's less time spent in the getting on the same page. I think
Yeah, yeah,
we're
yeah.
understanding more. Yeah. I really like the section where we take on, going on your first date post breakup. And this is another example of why I think our closeness and collaboration is so fun, because my mom went on her first date. Of course, we talked about it afterwards and laughed, and it was, it's not a good date. But then, later when we're working on the book, my knowledge of that and familiarity with my mom's experience allowed me to be like, "Oh, we gotta put the first date in there, and this is how that
Yeah.
can fit in with what we're working on." So, there's a spread about going on a bad date, and this is, a man who asks 0 questions and just rambles on. I think, every woman has been on that date at least once,
About his car.
about his car. And then
Yeah.
we've got a little, sampling here of the types that are available to you. This is the whole book is so specific to my mom's experience. We're big believers in the power of specificity. So, this is what it is like to swipe on the dating app of a woman in her 60s. You will see all
Yeah.
of these, all of these types. Um, so yeah, this is a favorite. We finished the book. Like, I remember sending off the last bits of art and things, so shortly before I gave birth to my twins. So yeah, I mean, there was there was a little bit of like time is of the essence, um, with that, but it's such a long project and it's so emotional. And mom, maybe you can talk more about this, but for you, mom, this was not a book that you were like, I would love to dwell in this space more. Like, I really, when we were
Yeah.
doing revisions and when we were rewriting, I had to kind of, I would be like, mom, we need to rewrite this section. It's not hitting, it's not funny, or whatever the problem was. And you would just be like, let's do it fast. And I would be like, no, we have to get it right. And it's not you, as it was the emotional pain of it that was there, and it was hard. I had more distance from it, and I was able to see it as the art and see, oh, we've got to get this right. We've got to communicate this clearly. And for my mom, it was not just the art. It sucks. It sucks to be in that space.
That is a valid point. Susie, for you, we'd have to imagine you experienced a relief or release of sorts within finishing this up and handing it into the publisher, knowing it was being set free out into the world, so to speak.
It was an awfully long time in that space is, it's years to, for a graphic book because of how long the art took almost a year alone, not counting, before and after work that went into it, and the writing took about, 9 months to a year, I think, and, so it was a pretty painful space for me. I got a counselor to talk about writing the book just to get me through it. And, and at the same time, it was I mean, the only reason that this was worth it, I'm a very private person, even though it doesn't appear that I'm a private person. I always have been. I don't particularly wanna be out there, but when it happened to me, the depth of how alone and, I felt I just go, "Wow, if the rest of the world feels this way when they get dumped, I can't believe it. Nobody told me this. It was an absolute, like, surprise to me how bad this felt. And I couldn't find in the reading that I did, I read about losing a spouse to death, everything about divorce. I went onto online forums. There are more resources now, but I just didn't find the thing that I said, oh, um, Betty Lou wrote this little passage that says, I will be okay. And, I didn't find anything like that. I just found a bunch of sad stories, and I go, I guess I'm gonna have to write my own pep talk. And because I'm like a person who likes logic and order, and I want somebody to tell me that if you do steps A, B, and C, you will get better in 1.2 years. And at that 1.2 year mark, you can go, okay, now I'm done. I reached a finish line, but this is just a completely different thing. This was a grief that it was very wrapped up, as I came to learn, in other issues that I had brought into the marriage from childhood. It was just a real ball of wax, and I had to sort through it, and that's how I did it. And I thought, I wouldn't be out in the world with this book unless I thought that somebody else probably would benefit, because when you're grieving a loss, it just feels terribly lonely. Sometimes you wanna isolate so you don't have to hear the awful dumb things that other people say to you that make you feel much worse. It's just a whole thing, the how we deal with grief, and I wanted to really kind of, in part, lift the silence around grief so, we can be more adept at getting through it, so then we can get on with the better parts of life instead of writing painful books.
Talking about how uniquely you two present the story here in the graphic novel format, you must have both felt upon finishing your own first read of the finished product that it was a much more powerful experience for the reader.
When you're really in the depths of grief, it's very hard to process that level of information, and that's what the beauty of the graphic format. And Hallie's art is very, it has a whimsy to it, it has a very it can really be very evocative emotionally in a way that really is an accompaniment, particularly when there's really serious um, a particularly difficult topic being discussed. I mean, it discusses suicide in the book, or, thoughts of suicide ideation. And so the trying to lighten it and is something that I think people can process much easier at a time when their brain is not functioning at all. It's like they've got what people call grief brain.
Have you two already begun brainstorming what's coming up next for you creatively together on the page?
Been bugging my mom for a while to write a kids book, and I think that that's what each of us feel excited about. I'm working on my own
Yeah.
kids book right now, but I think this book is almost this gauntlet that we have to go through in order for the next thing to happen. Don't you think, Mom?
I do. I'm looking forward to, leaving, the grief books behind
I would imagine.
and moving on to, like, happy woodland creatures that, in children's books. It was always what I thought I would do, and then journalism sidetracked all that. But, I'm really glad we did these books, and, I'm extremely hopeful that somebody else will find it relatable and somewhat helpful as they're going through it. And then I want to write about, happy bunnies. They're my first, and it's a world of wonder.
Well, we will certainly all look forward to it. Susie, Hallie, thank you so much both for taking out time today to be on About the Authors TV.
Thank you.
Thank you for such a rich conversation.